We go our ways and live our lives. All seems ordinary, normal. Yet all is extraordinary, astonishing. We human beings sit roughly midway between atoms and galaxies, between the infinitesimally small and the immensely large. And both, atoms and galaxies, must be so perfectly structured for them, for us, to exist. It's called fine-tuning, and it's all so breathtakingly precise that it cries out for explanation. To some, it may seem obvious that God designed it, that fine-tuning leads to God. But obvious can mislead, and there are other explanations. I'm Robert Lawrence Kuhn, and Closer to Truth is my search for explanations. Fine-tuning is perhaps modern theology's strongest design argument for the existence of God. That's why I start with a leading proponent, Robin Collins, a young Christian philosopher trained in physics.
Robin, I've been fascinated by the fine-tuning problem. Tell me what it is, how it works, and what are some examples?
Well, for about the last 40 years, scientists have discovered that the universe, its basic structure has to be just right in order for life to occur, particularly intelligent, conscious observers like ourselves. And this fine-tuning problem comes down to basically three different sorts of fine-tuning. First, there's the fine-tuning of the laws of nature. Second is the fine-tuning of what scientists call the constants of physics. And third, the fine-tuning of what they call the initial conditions of the universe. Let me start with the first, the laws of nature. The laws of nature have to be just right in order for life to occur. For example, if you didn't have gravity, or a universal attractive force, then matter in the universe would never clump. When the universe blew out in the Big Bang, you would just simply have matter dispersed, never clumping together into planets or stars. If you didn't have the strong nuclear force, the force that holds neutrons and protons together, then all protons would repel each other, and you could not get atoms with greater atomic number than hydrogen. And in that case, unlike what you see in Star Trek, you cannot get complex life out of a hydrogen gas cloud. It doesn't have enough stable complexity. If you didn't have the electromagnetic force, if it just didn't exist, then you wouldn't get complex chemistry.
Those are laws.
Those are laws.
That's category one.
That's category one.
Category two are the constants.
The constants of physics. Now, when we look at a lot of laws, like force laws, in fact, most laws, have various what they call free parameters. Let me give you an example. Let's look at gravity. There's Newton's law of gravity. It's force equals G times the first mass times the second mass divided by their distance squared. That G is a critical number. If I were to make it 1/2 of what it is right now, you would weigh 1/2 the amount. Then there's the cosmological constant,
which controls the expansion of the universe.
It opposes gravity. In the case of the cosmological constant, there's a natural expected range for it to occur in. Depending on how you calculate this range, it's anywhere from 1 to 10 to the 120th power times what it is now.
Which is a bigger number than every particle in the known universe.
Right. So it's way, way larger than even that. So what you have to have, it has to be adjusted just right. The estimate is it has to be adjusted 1 part in 10 to the 120th power.
Which is incalculable.
Incalculable. Now, if you had a ruler stretched across the universe and you were talking about fine-tuning, you thought of it as a radio dial, it would have It would have to be fine-tuned to much, much less than 1/trillionth of an inch at the very beginning of the ruler. That's how fine-tuned it would have to be.
Okay, now that's the second category. The third category are the
Is
initial,
the initial
conditions
of the universe. Correct. And the initial conditions have to be just right in order for life to occur. The biggest one of these initial conditions is the very low entropy state of the universe. If it wasn't in that ordered state, you wouldn't have usable energy. Low entropy corresponds to usable energy.
So if you cut across all of these three areas, the laws, the constants, and the initial conditions, what kind of conclusion do you come to?
Myself, I come to the conclusion this provides strong evidence that there's a designer, somebody who set the universe up, structured it in just the right way in order for conscious, intelligent bodied beings to come into existence.
If I didn't know you, I would think that you have just given me a wonderful reductionist principle to support an atheistic view of the world, because everything makes sense. I don't need some external element, some God, some supernatural force.
I think it actually glorifies God the most to see that how wonderfully constructed nature is, that everything works.
And that God need not intervene.
Need not intervene. In fact, if God had to intervene all the time, it would be sort of a sloppy or bad creator, a bad engineer or mathematician, if you will.
The laws of nature, the constants of physics, the initial conditions of the universe. Robin makes a threefold fine-tuning case for God. Sure, I'd like God to exist, but I'd shy defending God with design. I'd feel ever vulnerable to scientific discovery. And there are other non-God, non-supernatural explanations of fine-tuning. No one knows them better than physicist Victor Stenger, who makes an aggressive case for atheism. As for the fine-tuning argument for God, Victor is raring to refute it.
Vic, how do you, as a physicist, look upon the issue of the apparent fine-tuning of the universe?
Well, there's no doubt that if many of the constants of physics were changed, we would have a different universe. We would not have life as we know it. However, you have to realize that life is just basically organized systems, and it's perfectly possible to conceive of forms of life totally different from ours. We can't really use our knowledge of our own universe to predict how some other universe might look. I played a little game myself with the constants of physics, where I've changed them around and seen what kind of universe results. And I discovered that when I change the existing parameters of the universe over 10 orders of magnitude randomly, I still get over half of the stars living a billion years or more. This is without changing any of the laws of physics, just changing the constants. Now, to me, that indicates that the age of stars are not all that fine-tuned, that you can imagine long-lived stars. And once you have long-lived stars, that seems the primary need to have some kind of complex life form, because after all, complexity does arise out of simplicity pretty naturally. And so I think the fine-tuning argument just fails right off the bat, because it only applies to one form of life, and we have no way of showing that it rules out all conceivable forms of life.
But when you're tucked in your bed at night thinking about life and reality and existence, the fine-tuning argument doesn't give you pause for thought about maybe you've maybe left something out of the equation?
No. But taking our universe by itself, you have no good reason to conclude that things are so fine-tuned. And then there's another thing about the fine-tuning argument that kind of bothers me, and that is that if God made the universe and God is perfect, why would he have to fine-tune it at all? If he wanted it with life to be an important ingredient, especially humans, then why wouldn't he have humans being able to live any place, live on every planet, live in space? He could have done that. The planet is not so great when you think about it. We can only live on a third of the area of the planet. The sunlight, including ultraviolet rays, cause cancer. There are disasters all the time that kill millions of people. It's not exactly such a great place either. So if God really created the universe for us, he'd do a very good job. The argument for the creation requiring outside forces was a good argument until cosmology came along in the 20th century and showed that it could be perfectly natural. And we don't know exactly how it happened. We can't prove that it happened any one of these ways, but we certainly have a plausible explanation that solves the God of the gaps problem. The God of the gaps is the argument that if you can't explain something in science, then therefore you need God to explain it. Although you only need God to explain it if you can't come up with some plausible explanation. And the fine-tuning argument is a similar one where we have any number of ways out of it, not just the multi-universes. You have many universes, and it's a no-brainer because it means that we just happen to be in the universe that was suited for our forms of life. But even within a single universe, there's nothing that requires that only our particular form of life is possible.
Victor offers 5 natural reasons why the fine-tuning of the universe does not lead to God. Life need not be like us. Fine-tuning is not that fine. New theories like cosmic inflation solve mysteries. God of the gaps never lasts. And, after all, our life on Earth isn't so great. Of the 5, I may agree with 4. But even if true, none are bullseye defeaters of God. Here's the one that counts. How fine is the fine-tuning? I go to England, to Cambridge, to meet a philosopher of science from Ireland. Ernan McMullin is a physics-educated priest who envisions fine-tuning as a radically new kind of argument for God. Ernan, the fine-tuning of the universe is today one of the hottest intellectual subjects.
Right.
Physicists talk about it, philosophers, theologians. You're kind of all three.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you look at the fine-tuning of the universe?
In order to get a universe of our kind with multiple kinds of elements and long-lasting and so on, there's a lot of requirements to get a life-bearing universe. In order to get that, it turns out that the laws of nature have to be pretty much what they are. Now, at that point, the question was, what do we make of that? Well, there are only 4 possible answers to that, in my view. One answer would be to say, well, this is a matter of luck. The second possibility, which I think has to be taken seriously, is that the theories themselves are at the growing point. I think myself that there are so many coincidences in the laws of nature, so many different ones, and very specific, like the specific relations between specific forces, that all of that could follow from a simple single theory. It's possible, but I don't think it's very likely, it seems to me at the moment. It leaves us with only 2 answers. One of them seems quite extreme, and it's the multiverse, as it's sometimes called. That kind of solution would mean postulating the actual existence of a huge number of universes to make this work out, possibly an infinity, if that even makes sense, an infinity of universes. There is only one other alternative as far as I can see, and that is to hearken back to a very ancient tradition, the ancient tradition of creation theology, the idea that the universe is the work of a creator and that creator has a special, if you like, role for the human within this universe. If you contrast the Christian belief here and the belief in multi-universes, you have to make an enormous additional postulate in order to pull off the multi-universe view.
Well, physicists would say almost the opposite. They would say to postulate a God, has enormous complexity. And so at least to postulate multiple universes, we're dealing with universes. But to postulate something totally new, something there's no evidence for at all, is wishful thinking.
Yes, all right. Well, see, my response to that would be quite the opposite. Human beings have, long before physics developed, found it quite natural to postulate a being who is a creator. The notion of creation already incorporates the notion of fine-tuning if needed, whereas physics doesn't. The physicist has got to take the universe as given. I mean, that's simply not a question they can address. But on the other hand, from the creation standpoint, the universe as given requires a reason for its own existence.
Now, here's what the God hypothesis has to assume. Not only do we have to postulate some being that there's no evidence for whatsoever, some ethereal spiritual being, but we have to postulate that being so complicated and so complex that it can create whatever complexity we have here. So we make the problem doubly worse.
No, I don't agree with that at all. First of all, it's by no means necessary that a being sufficiently powerful to create our universe would have to be complex. I mean, scientists, in fact, themselves are accustomed to finding simple answers to very complex questions. We can ask why there should be a universe in the first place. The question of existence is a unique question. That's a question which the scientists can't address and shouldn't address. This is not a gap. This is simply a question that is of a different sort. But the point is that the religious believer has always asked it and has always given an answer to it. And the answer is that there is a being responsible for the fact that the universe exists, including possibly an infinity of universes or a large number, or possibly a universe which has always existed. You have a choice between two alternatives. You either stop with the universe as given, as the physicists, many of them would say you should, or you take the one step further and you postulate a single being, which in a single act of creation brings that universe to be, which answers the question of why there should be an object for physicists to work with in the first place.
But it doesn't answer why there should be that God in the first place. So
No, and that's very important. There has to be a stop point. The question is, which stop point do you preserve? The physicist may choose to have a stop point be one step earlier. The religious believer says, we want to take one step further. And we stop there. Now the question is, which is the better stopping point?
You got to stop someplace.
Yeah. I think myself that it's an issue that has never come up before in the history of this discussion, because previous to this, the way in which God got into it was usually as an answer to some specific feature of the universe, like design, for example. This has nothing to do with that. So it's not a shortcoming of science. It's not saying, look, there's something science can't explain, which we can explain. That's not it. What's being postulated here is a reason why there should be an object for physics to study in the first place.
To Ernan, fine-tuning is different in kind from traditional arguments from design, and it bores to the core of the essence of existence itself. I'm exhilarated by profound insight, but I fear superficial semantics. Ernan's first a priest, I remind myself, then a scientist. What about someone first a scientist, yet sensitive to spiritual ideas, but not wedded to them? So I go to New York to inquire of physicist Michio Kaku, whose background includes both Buddhism and Christianity. Michio, as a physicist from a Buddhist family, experienced in the Christian worldview, how do you analyze this fine-tuning?
When I was in second grade, my teacher made a statement that shocked me to the core. I still remember it after all these years. She said that God so loved the earth that he put the earth just right from the sun. Not too close, because the oceans would boil, not too far, because the oceans would freeze. I was floored. That's right. The earth is just right from the sun. Venus does have a scorched surface. Mars is a frozen desert. We are just right from the sun. Then I grew up, and of course now we look at stars and see over 200 dead planets that are too close, that are too far from the mother sun to have liquid oceans. So the solution to the so-called Goldilocks paradox, why is the Earth just right from the sun, is answered by the observation that they are dead planets. Well, how many Goldilocks zones are there? You start to count them, and you realize, oh my God, we are just right in so many different areas. It's like a jet airplane being ripped apart by a hurricane and then suddenly reassembled intact after the storm. That just doesn't happen by accident. So we have this paradox. Why are we in so many Goldilocks zones? Is it because God loved the universe, that He put the universe just right in the Goldilocks zone? Or are there dead universes? I tend to lean toward the latter, that there are dead universes out there. There are multiple universes where the sun never did ignite, universes which popped into existence and popped right back into existence in a big crunch. Well, there are two philosophies you can take. The Copernican principle says that there's nothing special about humans, nothing special about us, nothing special about our piece of the universe. We're very ordinary. We exist with billions and billions and trillions of stars, billions of planets perhaps in the universe. We're almost insignificant. We're nothing. The anthropic principle says, wait a minute. We are special. We are so special that we're perhaps the only universe among a whole collection of universes that have intelligent life. I think we are special. We are special, first of all, because we have the conditions for life, DNA, and even consciousness. It is fine-tuned, perhaps fine-tuned by luck, but it is fine-tuned nonetheless. Our universe, in some sense, knew we were coming. We are in a universe that makes intelligent life possible.
Does that give any corroboration, any confidence, any increased probability to some sort of a non-physical explanation for the universe?
There's another way to explain it. And this is that perhaps universes evolve, that as these universes die, baby universes are created by advanced civilizations, and the DNA is precisely the physical constants of the universe.
This would require a super advanced civilization to be able to create...
Unimaginably advanced, but this is consistent with the laws of physics as we know them. And this would allow for an evolution of universes. It's no accident that it has these conditions because it was a spin-off of another universe, and we are, in some sense, winners not of a cosmic jackpot. We are simply winners of survival of the fittest. So think of a bubble bath with billions of soap bubbles, most of them dead, but the soap bubbles that have life spin off more soap bubbles, more soap bubbles.
So over time, those would proliferate.
That's right. So in other words, perhaps there's a reason why we are just right from the sun, because we have benefited from survival of the fittest, going back unimaginable eons into the past, so that each universe has the DNA consistent with not just intelligence, but advanced intelligence.
But even so, there had to be a first universe, and there the fine-tuning problem would reassemble and reemerge stronger than ever, no? The fine-tuning problem demands explanation. Here are four. 1. Brute fact and luck. The one universe that just happens to exist also just happens to support life. 2. The universe can be only one way, and that one way would generate life.
Why are we in so many Goldilocks zones? Is it
3. Multiple universes, such that everything will happen somewhere, including us. 4. A creator God who designed the universe. Here's what I think. Multiple universes would explain fine-tuning of our universe, but a fine-tuned universe generator for the vast ensemble of multiple universes is still needed. As for supernatural explanations, a traditional God is but one of many untold options. Moreover, new kinds of physical laws may seem supernatural. Where do we stop? That's the question. What's the end of all explanations? Our universe, multiple universes, or something beyond? For the riddle of existence, fine-tuning is our biggest clue. That's why we stress it on Closer to Truth.
For complete interviews and for further information, please visit closertotruth.com.